I subjected myself to this, but somehow I got roped into this grass identification. So this is normally a multi-day doing work in the field, doing work in the lab to learn grass identification. So we're going to do it in like 30 minutes. So I hope you guys are ready. So to move forward. Do I have a point? Thank you. All right. So let's just start with the basics, right, of grasses. So these are things that some of you folks already know but never heard of. So of course, grasses are in their own family, the Poaceae family. They are not the largest family in the world, not the fourth largest, but they are considered the most widespread. It's hard to find a patch of dirt in the world that is. And of course, as a family, they are incredibly diverse. Part of the challenge of identification. So here in Florida, we have about 400 species, and we start adding on, subspecies. That's about 40% of them on data. Like, uh, right? So continuing on this kind of legend, these grasses are monocots. So that means they have vertical parts and 360. They have lateral veins. They go up and down. Comes to this type. They have a single seed. Single seed. The roots of a bamboos about they can be part they can be basal. They are wind pollinated. They can be so let's get it out of the way, right? This is something that I think a lot of us feel, and some of you have even expressed to me tonight. Grasses are a weak area, and I think a botanist out there that hasn't been identifying grasses. So let's us all admit that yes, it's okay. We can come together with our system. Because it's not just grasses, right? Grasses and their quote unquote lookalikes. So they can cause a lot of anxiety. So I hear this a lot from folks. And so this is kind of an example of where we'll be field tripping on Saturday. And looking at this landscape of grass-like plants. And it's like, oh my gosh, we're gonna sort this out. How do we sort this out? So it is intimidating. So you're not alone if you feel this way. I just want to make sure you do this. All right, so but we're not going to let them push us around, right? So we're going to arm ourselves with information so that we can try to get the better of them, right? When it comes to identifying them. So you're going to set out, you're going to learn this. So you first want to have the tools in hand to do that. And I highly recommend having some of these grass guides. Those are one of the hundreds I really like. So if you don't expect to find a different grass, I recommend picking them up. Okay. Lisa did actually. So all right. So that's what we're gonna talk about. Okay. Uh, also, and then moving on. Let's see. Is this better? Can you hear me now? Is it? Got it. Thank you. All right. All right. So again, so spikelet, to review, I am echoing bad.
But we could hear you when you were echoing.
Can everybody mute their microphones, please? Um, how is this? There's a delay and it's going to drive me crazy. How's that? Is that better? Can folks at home hear me? Okay. Bill says yes. Okay. Okay, whatever you did, Elliot, you I think saved the day, but I'm still echoing. Can you hear me at home? Okay. We're just going to continue. Okay. All right. So now that you guys have studied on your own, we're going to move on. Just kidding. All right. So again, so the inflorescence of the grass is broken up into structures called spikelets. Okay. So we're going to focus on the letter C here, right here. If you can see my mouse. All right. So again, these specialized bracts called glooms are what differentiate the spikelets. All right. So the spikelets are made up of the flowers or florets. Okay, and we'll look at this in a little bit different way that'll hopefully help it make a little more sense. So this is a really important point because it's easy to confuse spikelet and floret. All right, so a spikelet can have one flower or many flowers. All right, so moving kind of up this letter C diagram. I lost my mouse. That's okay. Oh, here we go. All right. So moving up, you can see, so these, oh, if you can see my mouse, so these are the florets. So this particular spikelet in this illustration has several florets. And the structures of those are also more specialized bracts. The outer one being the lemma, inner one being the palea, and those are both enclosing letter D, which is the flower. Okay. So the flower, of course, is made of a flowering plant in another family, right? We have our male and female parts. We have our ovary, which of course is where our seed comes from. And then we have these little structures called loticules. So the loticules, their function is when the grass is ready to flower, those swell and help the stigmas and the anthers to exert for that wind pollination that I mentioned. All right. So again, these are terms. I just want you to kind of like be familiar with them. I'm just kidding about the quiz. There will be no quiz. I just want you to kind of wrap your head around these. All right. So we're going to move forward, maybe. Sorry, we're not moving forward. I got this. We got this. Okay, cool. Okay. Thank you. All right, we're going to look at this same diagram in just a little bit different way. And the reason for this organization is to try to help you be familiar with the terminology and the structures that go with each structure, if you will, right? So the inflorescence, of course, that's that aggregation, right? It's the flowering head. So on a grass, it could be terminal, which is at the end, or it could be axillary along that culm, vocabulary word, right? So the stem, of course, of that is the peduncle, right? The stem of the inflorescence. The rachis is the stem of the inflorescence, within the spikelets. And of course, it's made up of spikelets, right? So moving over to the spikelet. So this is, so again, the spikelet contains the glumes. Those differentiate the spikelet. And then we have pedicels, which are the stalk of the individual spikelets, just like in any other flowering family. And then it's made up of the florets, right? So then moving over to the floret, that's where we have these other terms, right? That's the reproductive organ. So we have the racula, which is a little stem of the floret, the lemma, the palea, the pistil, the stamen, ovary, and lodicules. All right. So the idea here is just to kind of try to illustrate if you're looking up a description of a grass and you're seeing these terms, okay, so what do these terms actually apply to, right? So the good thing is in these pictures, it's very cut and dry, but when it comes to grasses, oftentimes some of these structures are modified or missing, which may add complication, right? But again, this is just a familiarity for you guys. So let's look at it a little more from a real life standpoint, if you will. So on this side of the screen, of course, we see this, we have our stalk, which is, what's a stalk? Home! You guys are so good. All right, and then of course we have our leaf sheath, right? And then our leaf blade, right? Both parts of the blade. And then we have this little structure sticking up, which is super important. Say it together. Ligule, that's right, good. Okay, you guys are not gonna forget this. I love it. All right. So, and again, we're going to see this illustrated a little bit different way. So again, we have ligule, right? You can clearly see that membrane. We have our leaf blade. We have our culm. And so in this photo, we have introduced another structure, vegetative structure, which is the node, which oftentimes can be basically a swelling of the culm. And the reason that that's important to know is because sometimes there's features of the node that are in a description, like node is hairy or node lacks hairs or things like that. So when you see that swelling, sometimes it's a different color and sometimes it's not. And of course, the internode, that's just the space between nodes. All right, so let's look at some actual photos of what a spikelet might look like. So we have this one on this side. I don't even know if it's that one, right or left. So you can see those large structures at the base. Those are the glumes, right? Those are the bracts that differentiate the spikelet, right? And then we have our palea the lemma enclosing the palea here. And same thing here. We're kind of looking at it from a different angle and then moving up. So this you could safely say probably has about 4 spikelets. They might probably not all fertile, but 4 florets. See, look, the wrong words. So this one over here, so again, glumes, upper and lower glumes, right? And this one has 3 little florets in there. See, and you can see the lemma's on the outside, palea's on the inside. Inside of that is floret, right? So this grass right here, the one on the bottom, what does that look like to you? You guys have seen this before. We have a grass that lives here that looks kind of like this. Sea oats, that's a good one. Or love grasses, right? So when you see those little oats, what is that little oat? Differentiated by glumes. You said that. Yes, very good. Very good, that's right. And so same thing for a love grass, right? So you see these, in this case, they're quite small structures, are glumes, right? And then we have lemma, right? So each of those lemmas is differentiating the florets. Okay, does that some level make sense, I hope? So I just want you to kind of think about that difference between what is a spikelet, what is the actual floret, okay? All right, and so speaking of the flowers, so when it comes to grasses, they have these 3 main inflorescence types, right? These are not necessarily at all, or these are not unique to grasses. So we have the raceme, the panicle and the spike. And so I have here a couple of examples of what those would look like in real life, if you will. So with the raceme, we have the spikelets are stalked. The stalk may be very short, but it's still there. And sometimes the inflorescence might have multiple racemes, like in this example here, though with the paspalum. And then the panicle, which is our most common type of inflorescence for grasses. And this is a very classic panicle that we're looking at. And it's not unusual for grasses to have a panicle. And you're like, that does not look like a panicle at all, but it is. And of course, this is multi-branched. The spikelets are stalked. And then the spikelets are sessile, which means they're on that rachis without any kind of stalk. All right, so when you're looking at grass descriptions, you're usually going to see some version of it's a raceme, it's a panicle, it's a spike, or it's a spicoid panicle. That's always my favorite when they start mixing them together. So again, just some more illustrations. So this is a great photo. This Axonopus is a great photo of those exerted stigma and the stamens exerted. And again, you can see perfect example of wind pollination, right? They're exerted, they're waiting for their pollen to come along. And so the little fuzzy parts, of course, those are the stigma sticking out. And so this is a grass in full flower. How beautiful is that, right? They don't have these little sexy petals, but they truly are beautiful. So, and then these are some vegetative structures that I wanted to just illustrate for you guys. So next to, this one right here, this is one of my favorites. This is an example of a rhizome, right? So, and you can see in the photo down below, rhizomes versus stolons. You've probably heard those terms before. So these are not unusual at all to have these characteristics with grasses. So these are actually stems, right? These are not roots, they're lateral stems. Stolon above ground, rhizome below ground. So this is the photo is torpedo grass. Yay. So, and you can see it's very robust rhizome there in the photo. So of course that's the below ground stem. And then the caryopsis, of course, or grain is the seed of the grass. So that's what's going to develop from that ovary inside the comfort of a palea and a limo. You guys are so good. See, you got this. We don't need 3 days. We're good. All right, so enough of that. Okay. So a couple of the other characteristics, and so this is important. So if you guys are interested in learning more about how to identify grasses, it's important to consider other characteristics besides just the flowers, the fertile structures. So again, things that we want to consider when we're looking at how to ID, like habit, right? Like we already mentioned, where is it growing? Is it salty? Is it not? Is it wet, dry? Is it a roadside? Is it disturbed? I want to know that. It's helpful. The overall size of the grass, is it taller than me? Is it down at ground level? That can be helpful. So the leaf, the shape, is it flat? Is it rolled, right? How long is that How long is that leaf? How wide is that leaf? Hair is a big one. So here we have example up in the corner, right here of a nice hairy grass, right? So that has some nice stiff hairs on it. That's a barnyard grass. You grab a hold of that and it almost will poke you in the hand, right? So presence or absence of grass, and there could be, or excuse me, of hair. There could be hairs even on that lemma, all right? So that's where your magnification comes in. So awns are a big one. So in this photo right here in the middle, this is a 3-awn grass. So awns are extensions typically of the lemma or the palea, and they're like almost like a long hair sticking off. So the 3-awn grasses, like wiregrass, have, you guessed it, 3 awns. And as many of them, as they dry, those awns, they start off straight and then they end up sort of contorting and curling away, which gives it that appearance that you see there. Bristles. So here we have a Soteria, bristlegrass. So the bristles, in this case, the bristles are below the spikelets. And from this view, it's a little bit challenging to see that. But when you look at it with magnification, you'll see that the spikelets don't have anything on them. The bristles are all below the spikelets. So that's why when you see these grasses, when they're older and the spikelets or the spikelets have fallen off, the bristles remain because they're not actually attached. So you might have modified spikelets like this synchris right here, right? So those are the spikelets, and they're modified into this burr that sticks on your clothes and pokes you in the skin, right? But it gets it traveling, right? So it's quite a really interesting modification. But within those spikelets are the little florets, right? Also important, venation, right? So who knows this grass on the bottom? You guys are nerds. Yes, Kogon grass, right? We know that because it has a very characteristic off-center mid-vein, right? So that's one of the diagnostic characteristics to be able to identify that grass. We don't need a flower, right? We just need a couple of general vegetative characteristics, and we can tell it pretty easily, right? So we don't really have anything else that looks like it in that exact sense. So pith is whether or not the stem or culm, right? Whether or not that's hollow. Most grasses are hollow, but we do have an exception here in Florida. And more margins, of course. Do the leaf margins have any kind of teeth on them, any kind of dentation? So sometimes that can be important to take note of as well. So we can't talk about grasses without at least mentioning that we have some lookalikes, right? So this is another one of those, what makes grasses so challenging is the fact that we can have other plant families that can sort of superficially resemble them. And so sometimes I've found myself in the field looking very carefully. It's like, do I have a sedge? Do I have a rush? Do I have a grass? You know, and so we want to look at some specific characteristics to be able to tell us that, right? So this is, we're not going to dive too deep on this. This is just kind of to get you kind of familiar with some of the differences. So this first picture is looking at the florets, right? So of course with the grass we've already covered, you know what that looks like. So in the sedges, and this is of course in the very classic sense, we have it. This is botany. We have exceptions to everything, right? In the classic sense, this is separated by a single bract in Cyperaceae. And then Juncaceae has these will have 6 tepals surrounding this ovary, which is full of many little seeds. And I'll show you an illustration of that in just a second. Many little seeds, whereas grass has 1 big seed, Cyperaceae 1 big seed. Okay. So, and again, this is a very sort of classic example of the stems. Is this universal? No. But of course, most of us have heard the old adage, sedges have edges, rushes are round, grasses are hollow. It's a guideline. It can be helpful to you, right? So if you pick up something that's where the culm or the stem is triangular in shape, you're probably not looking at a grass, right? So this is helpful to know these. And also sedges and rushes typically will have that pith in their culm, and grasses typically do not. And another helpful thing is the leaf arrangement, and that's what this bottom illustration is kind of what you might expect to see. So grasses, that leaf arrangement is kind of a side to side, disticus or side to side, whereas with sedges especially, it will be more round. So imagine yourself looking down on that plant and you would see those leaves coming out in a circle, if you will. And rushes are kind of a combination of one or the other, or have no leaves at all. And some sedges have no leaves at all. But it's, again, just kind of like a general guideline. And hopefully on a field trip, we'll be able to see some examples of all of these. And so then again, of course, just some photographs. Again, you can see Juncaceae. We have this capsule full of small little bitty seeds. And you can see the photo below. Again, you can see those round capsules full of seeds. Sedges, they have, if you were to really drill down into that inflorescence, you would have a single bract against that spikelet, and then they have a single seed called an achene. And then they have modified structures that are bristles. Not all achenes have bristles, but some do. So the texture of the achene, the style of the bristle, how hairy it is, are all diagnostic characteristics for identification. So if you're identifying sedges, you usually need to have an achene. Very helpful for confirmation. And then of course we have Poaceae here. This is a great picture. We can see that sort of swelling and of the developing fruit. And then we have the glooms. You can see these they're a little bit purplish, the upper or the single gloom there. And then we have a lemma. Let me find my mouse keeps disappearing. Here we go. So we have our gloom, we have our lemma, our palea on the inside, and then oftentimes in grasses, when the seed drops, oftentimes we'll have the lemma and palea still surrounding it when it drops. Okay, and then again, just some photos. Again, these are probably plants that you recognize, right? This juncus, this big, large head rush, something you guys have probably seen out in the field. And then Alabama swamp sedge, another very common sedge that we have. But just looking at them sort of side by side here, you can kind of see some different, the different forms that they take. Rush versus sedge versus grass. Okay, all right, so I have to throw this in here because I can't help it. These are also not grasses. And the reason I throw them in here is because their common names include the word grass. And so I just want to make sure that we remind everybody, not actual grasses. And the most confusing ones on this page here probably are the sawgrass and the hurricane grass, right? Both of those are sedges. So sawgrass, that makes up our river of grass, right? Which is actually a river of sedge. Yes, so you can tell all of your non-Florida friends that it's actually the river of sedge. And same thing, hurricane grass, again, that's a sedge. So that can be a little bit confusing because you hear that common name and you're like, oh, wait a minute. But again, we're not looking at these plants in great detail here, but they are definitely sedges. And siltgrass, of course, that's an Asteraceae. So arrowgrass, this is one that stumped me, and Bruce had to help me with this a long time ago. It's a very odd plant that we don't see very often, but it's a kind of a wet, and even will take some salt in the Juncaginaceae family. And then, of course, blue-eyed grass, not a grass at all. So this one I got from Chris Meyer, good thinking. So this is a longleaf pine in its grass stage, right? Looks like a clump of wiregrass, doesn't it? So you would have to, if you looked closely at that, you would see, the bundled leaves, bundled in a leaf sheath, and you would say, oh, wait a minute, that's not a grass at all. But you have to look closely at it. You can see how it might be kind of deceptive. So kudos to you, Chris. That was a good one. All right, so habitat. Of course, grasses typically love fire, right? Most of them will regrow vegetatively. Some grow back from seed, but not only do they recover from fire really well and really come back much more lush, usually very quick to reproduce, to flower and reproduce after a fire, they're really important for carrying that fire. So when a fire is moving across the landscape, the grasses are a really important part of helping it to carry along. So habitats that have been long fire suppressed that maybe have a lot more shrubbery versus the herbaceous component of grasses might not carry fire as well until we start to get some more of that grass component in there. So these are, super important for that fire. And so this picture at the bottom, I don't have a date on it, but I would guess it would probably be less than 2 weeks, probably, since it burned. And you can see it already coming back. And again, this other one, I don't know, probably not even a month old before everything starts really coming back. All right, so let's just look at a couple of examples of grasses. So enough of that technical stuff. So in our area, we have habitats that are rich in grasses, right? We have wet and dry prairie. Of course, we already mentioned those. Our mesic flatwoods, wet flatwoods, our scrubby flatwoods, dunes, coastal grassland. It's in the name, right? So those are really rich in grasses. This is a great picture of a wet prairie. So what are some examples of grasses? So we have our 3-ons. We already mentioned those. And I have a bunch of pictures here of my favorite 3-on. And you know why it's my favorite? Because it's so easy to identify. Like, I don't even need a magnifier. I can tell you right away what it is, right? So you'll find if you work on grasses very much that those become some of your favorites, the ones that you can be like, oh, I know what that is. So this one, of course, the Aristidus pisiformis, this is the bottlebrush 3-on, right? So it starts off with that nice, neat, very manicured appearance. And then as it begins to dry, and those 3-ons that I already mentioned, as they dry and they contort, then they become all crazy looking, right? And they look like that bottlebrush. And then this photo at the top is what bottlebrush would look like in the landscape as it begins to dry and becomes very distinctive. So you can impress all of your friends because you're going to know exactly what it is, what it looks like. Looks like bottlebrush. And then at the bottom is wiregrass, right? It's a grass a lot of us are familiar with. It's a clumping grass. It has that rolled leaf, and it is also a 3-on. And this is an example of it flowering. So this area probably burned fairly recently because wiregrass really likes to have some kind of disturbance, preferably in the form of fire, to flower. So the ons on these 3-on grasses are very useful for identification. How long are they? How are they contorted? So if you're trying to identify, that's an important thing to look at. All right, the witch grasses. I hate these. These are my nemesis. They're everywhere. And they're really great grass, but they are, to me, very challenging to identify because they're vegetative characteristics can be somewhat variable. The keys have overlapping characters, and they're not truly dichotomous. Drives me crazy. But they're beautiful, and again, pretty diverse. We have some that are super narrow leaved, some that are wide leaved, and they have a very characteristic panicled inflorescence. And they usually are in the kind of tufted. So I know you guys will recognize seeing these out on your hikes. So the finger grasses, eustaches. So we have two species in our area. We have the Petrea, which is in the photo. So these the leaf sheath is flattened and the stem is flattened. So if you were to go out and touch it or you're looking at it, it's very flattened. I keep say flattened 25 times, but it gives it a distinctive appearance, which makes it pretty easy to identify. And if it's fertile, then you have these fingers, if you will, these racemes sticking up that are in this sort of paniculate arrangement, and again all covered in spikelets, which are very unusual looking, right? So again, with that diversity of grasses and highly modified, so Eustaches glauca has many more racemes than Eustaches petrea. So that's one of the ways you can tell it apart, along with the more glaucous color of Eustaches glauca. And habitat, Eustaches glauca oftentimes is more wet. Indian grass, another one that's really easy to identify. So it's on the table in the back. So when we're finished, I want you guys to all go and look at it. It has no flowers on it, but you can still identify it because it has a very distinctive ligule. Where's the ligule? Yes, I love it. Good. I love it. So it has a very distinctive large ligule that sticks up. And so even when this grass is sterile or doesn't have any flowers on it, you can still confirm its identity. So Sargastrum and secundum. So does anybody know what secund means? Exactly. They're all the spikelets are on one side, right? So this is not a unique term to grasses, but a grass like Sargastrum secundum and you can kind of see it as it kind of leans over because all of those spikelets are on one side. And of course, it has this large membranous ligule. So I want you guys to all go over and look at it when we finish. All right, so blue stems or broom sedges. So these are a bit challenging. I always find these a bit challenging because they use some slightly different terminology. So the broom sedges, those are our andropogons and our schizoceriums. So the inflorescence, the parts of the inflorescence, right? They use this terminology called a rame, which you can almost use interchangeably with raceme, but they're in this group, they're called rames. And in andropogons, there are 2 or more rames per inflorescence unit, right? So in this picture here of Andropogon ternarius, you can see there are 2 rames, right? So each of those sticking up is a rame, right? In Schizocerium, there is only 1 rame. So that's a good way to tell those 2 genera apart, right? And that's what we have in the picture here in the lower corner. There's a single rame sticking up. So there are a lot of them, but they're not paired. Only a single one like that. So this is super fun to be. So when you're looking at the spikelets, so like this unit right here is a spikelet of an andropogon or a schizocerium, and it actually has 2 florets there, and there's one that's fertile and there's one that's sterile, and this is where we talk about like the missing pieces. So this is the fertile one, right? And this one is it's fertile and it is sessile, meaning it has no stem. And this is the pedicellate or sterile spike or sterile floret right here. And then this right here, this structure right here connects them each to each other. And as they break up, then they fall. Each spikelet falls. So and andropogons or schizoceriums, rame, spikelet. Okay, so those are a little more specialized and they can get to be a little bit confusing, and I always have to like go back and review, okay, what am I looking at? And and so they can be a bit challenging, especially because these rames can be there's a bazillion branches of these rames, and so that's where you get that sort of plumy look of the broom sedges. So we'll hopefully see some on our trip, but they may not be fertile yet. They're coming up, but I think some of the schizoceriums might be, which will be fun. We'll have to try to look at those. All right, so crown grasses, the paspalums, of course, these are super common. So they usually have these the inflorescence is made up of several racemes. Sometimes they're split, like this one, like Paspalum vaginatum or Bahia grass, very similar, or very common grass, Bahia. The drop seeds, we have a drop seed showed up tonight, dropped in tonight. So you guys can actually go back and look at it. So the drop seed, and I love this one because we have 3 different habitats of the Sporobolus. So this one, Sporobolus indicus, that's the smut grass that has the fungus that grows in the florets. And that is usually in disturbed areas. And then we have the Sporobolus gentius, the pinewood drop seed, which grows in our intact flatwood communities. And then we have Sporobolus virginicus, which grows in the dunes. And so we have these really interesting Sporobolus species in all these different habitats. And of course, they have a panicled inflorescence that might be more spicate or closed, like in indicus, or in virginicus, or more open, like in gentius. But these are all the same genus. Of course, the love grasses. So we already mentioned these, right? They have a very distinctive spikelet, right? And we know we're looking at the spikelet because we have these little characters at the base, right? Our little bracts, gloom, gloom, lemma, 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 like that, right? And inside each lemma is our floret. Okay, so the love grasses. So this is Elliott's love grass, which is one I think most of us are familiar with. We have these spikelets that are, at the end of the inflorescence branches. And then here's another example of one, Eragrostis ciliaris, which is the panicle is much more spicate, closed like that. All right, and the lemmas, of course, are folded, so it gives that spikelet a flattened appearance. And the spikelets are usually pretty closely nested. And the basket grass, I included this one because this is one that's you're probably going to see this time of year, right? It's an annual grass and it comes up in the wet areas that are wet and shady. If this was an annual grass, I'm sure that it would be in the trade. Everyone's always looking for grasses to cover up their shaded areas, and this would be a great one if it was an annual. But this is another great example of what an awn looks like. You can see the awn coming off of the spikelets. Okay, so of course in wetlands, there are 3 species in Florida, but that's being all like put in a blender and mixed up. The taxonomic changes. There are if you were to look at the USF plant atlas, there are 2 that are non-native, 2 species non-native, and 1 that is native. But again, that's a sort of a taxonomic issue, I think. So we're probably like 1 native and 1 non-native, but there is a non-native, at least 1. So yes. You do kind of have to be careful. And if I remember correctly, it's like the length of the awns, I think, is one of the characters that you look at to try to differentiate them. It's a bit challenging. I've pulled my hair out a little bit on them before. So of course, wetlands, right? Those are another important habitat. Depression marshes, salt terns and salt marshes, banks of creeks and rivers, very other important areas where we have grasses. So sugarcane plume, right? This is one that is, I also love this one because it's so recognizable. You can botanize this guy from the car, right? You're driving by, you're like, hey, sugarcane plume sticking up. You can't miss it, right? So this is a saccharum, like a true sugar. And so of course it does like wetter areas, not necessarily in a wetland, but does like it when it's wet. And it has that beautiful like reddish panicle sticking up, but it's a large clump grass. And oftentimes we never even see the vegetative part of the grass because we're just like, wow, look at that. So you can impress all your friends with that one. So the barnyard grasses, again, these are very common in wetland. We also have some species that are ruderal. You might find in disturbed areas, like Echinoclona is in disturbed areas. But ones like this are typically in your wetlands, right? It could be ditches, wetland edges. So this guy, I love it because he illustrates how hairy, again, in this case, the leaf sheath is, right? So if you were to pull that off, it's not the stem, it's not the culm that's hairy, it's the leaf sheath. And again, very stiff hairs. And then, of course, an example of what awns look like. And you can see this guy is in full flower with all of his, it's like anthers exerted there. All right, so the panic grasses, again, these are, again, very common. You guys are probably quite familiar. We have the Panicum genus, the Coleotinia genus. They used to be Panicums, and now they've changed, and they'll probably change again. But that's okay. We can, if you call them Panicums, We understand what you're saying, right? The point of plant names is so we can all speak the same language, right? And know how they're related to each other. So if you say panicums, I'll take it. Again, they have that very characteristic panicled inflorescence. And again, just a few examples here. Coleotinia anceps and rigidula are sometimes can be a little bit challenging to tell apart. With anceps has a rhizome, rigidula does not. And so that can be helpful, whether or not it has a rhizome. And then this photo on the bottom is one of our endangered former panicums, now Coleotinia abscissa, which is our cutthroat grass, which is endemic to the Lake Wells Ridge area. And it has this very elongated, very widened top of the leaf sheath there, very characteristic, which I think is kind of cool. So the maiden canes, of course, we have two plants that carry the common name of maiden cane in our area. The blue maiden cane, Amphicarpum limburgianum, which is this guy right here. And it has a kind of a bluish blade and a white margin. In this case, it's turned red with age and sun. And then we have, used to be Panicum hematomum, is now Hymenacne hematomum, is our more typical maiden cane, green leaved. But you can see they have very different inflorescences. These like little tiny spikelets versus these much larger spikelets. This is a blue stem maiden cane here on the bottom. So if they're flowering, they're very easy to tell apart, but the vegetation is pretty easy to tell apart. But they're both usually wetland species. Cord grasses, yay! Cord grasses are good. They used to be Spartinas. They're now Sporobolus. So again, name changes. But if you say Spartina, we still know what you mean. If you say Sporobolus, we probably won't. Because it's I know I haven't gotten used to it yet. So again, this is so Spartina alterniflora. This is the cord grass that grows out in the intertidal zone. Not a super common in our area, but does occur. I find a lot of times it occurs because it's been planted. So where that zone is occupied more by mangroves in our area, but Spartina, as you get further north, Spartina alterniflora is a major component of the intertidal zone. And of course, Spartina bakeri is freshwater clumping usually, sometimes a little bit of salt. And then Spartina patens is very rhizomatous and likes those sandy dunes better. So, all right, so native versus invasive, we can't not talk about that, right? So of course, Florida has almost 200 non-native grasses. Only some are invasive, some are just non-native. Since some are hard to eradicate, right? They have characteristics that make them really resilient. And some of us in the room can say they're really hard to get rid of. So of course, they're well adapted to disturbance. They have, of course, these traits like rhizomes or stolons that do help them to be more resilient to being removed. A lot of them have a lot of viable seeds. Some of them are deliberate introductions like pasture grasses, right? We have escaped pasture grasses. They can be kind of a headache to get rid of as well. And some can be easily confused with native species. So we have on one side here, we have Fakahatchee grass versus Kogan grass, right? Many of Fakahatchee grass has fallen victim to, being herbicided accidentally because someone was treating Kogan grass and went, oh, look at that, and didn't look closely to make sure that they could tell the difference. And same thing here on the bottom, we have an example of switchgrass, Panicum virgatum versus guinea grass. You can't see the inflorescence super well, but they can be easily confused. They're both big, they both have a big open panicle. And so without knowing some of the key characteristics to sort of tell them apart, they can be easily confused. And a couple of my other favorites. Parral grass, this one right here, Eurocloa mutica. If you are a frequent visitor to Myakka River State Park, you probably have seen this growing in the floodplain, unfortunately, along with West Indian marsh grass, which has a pithy stem, exceptions. Remember, botany has exceptions to everything. And so it's one of the grasses in our area that if you were to cut that culm, you would see pith on the inside. It's not hollow. And it also has these really cool auricled leaves. It has these little structures coming around. So again, we have the leaf sheath, leaf blade, and they come around with these little ears coming around that are auricled. And then torpedo grass here, they have, remember the branches of the inflorescence at 45 degrees. They tall grass, beautiful, but don't like that one either. And then Bermuda grass. Bermuda grass is one of my big pet peeves because it escapes cultivation a lot. So it gets planted as sod and then escapes and lives in your wetland forever. So that's a one to be watchful of, hard to get rid of. All right. So you're out there, you're going to look at those grasses and you're going to identify them until you grab one and you're like, I have no idea. All right, that's okay. That's okay. You can get help. All right. So I want you guys to please, if you do not already use the iNaturalist app, please get it. It's easy to do. You got it on your phone, you have it on your mobile device, and you can make sure you have your location turned on, and you can take a photo of that grass. It could be any plant, right? Or animal or insect or anything, living or was living, and you can post it, and the community will help you identify it, right? So experts like Jeff will get on and tell you what it is, right? And so if you have an idea, suggest an idea. If you're absolutely clueless, it's okay. You can just say Poaceae, I think, and then somebody can come in and help try to and fill in those IDs. And so but it is important when you're taking pictures of things like grasses that have these characteristics that require magnification. It is important to try to capture those characteristics as well as you can. So that's why I like to say you should have at least 4 photos of any grass or sedge or brush. You always want to have multiple pictures of anything you're taking, but you want to have that habit to have the inflorescence, right? In this case, lopsided Indian grass is easily recognizable, but I could have something like a panicle, like a panicum that isn't recognizable, in which case I would want to try to get closer magnification if I could, right? But I might not be able to get great magnification, but I can get photographs of leaves. I can get photographs of ligule, right? Ligule is important for identification. So in this case, if you were to drill down on the photo in the corner, you would see that sort of long ligule of the lopsided Indian grass sticking up. So even if you didn't have an inflorescence, somebody who knows might be able to look at that and say, "Oh, lopsided Indian grass," just by looking at that oracle. Okay, and then looking at the location of where you found it, at the leaves. So, but you want to try to be able to provide as much detailed information as possible for someone to be able to make an ID. If you don't, you're not going to get an ID. Okay, and sometimes you won't get an ID because grasses do have, many of them do require that magnification, and if you can't get it, sometimes you just can't say. You might be able to say to genus level, but not to species level. All right. So please, I encourage you to use it. It's a very handy tool. And I can tell you from the land management standpoint, it's really important to be able to look at iNaturalist and see what things have been posted and identified on our sites, right? It's very helpful. You guys are you guys that are out on properties are eyes on the ground, and it's really, really helpful to have those posted. All right. So key takeaways, right? Don't be afraid. Okay, I want you to remember some of these terms. So as you're looking at descriptions of grasses, you can say, "Hey, I know what that ligule is, and I know where it is on that grass," right? But do spend some time getting familiar with, again, the structures of plants, the terminology that's used. Get some guides that can help you, and then practice. If you don't practice, it's easy for it to just sort of leak out. And they do try to go on field trips, like going on walks with folks that know some grasses. And as you learn them in the field and learn what those characteristics are, it becomes more and more comfortable for you. And so with time and with practice, you can look at a scene like this and not be so scared. I mean, I'm still kind of scared, but but I think you know what I mean. So, all right. So with that, I will leave you with this hilarious, I think it's hilarious. For those of you who have not been there, just drive east on Fruitville, and when you come to the end of the pavement, just keep driving. And when you come to the electric gate, turn right. You're there. So we will be mostly walking in some scrubby flatwoods and mesic flatwoods, and it will likely be wet between the parking lot and our trail. It is kind of, the property kind of dips down. I'll do my best to try to find us maybe a drier route, but I can't make any promises, especially if it's rains more. It's beginning to dry out a little bit, but the water was a good almost 12 inches deep walking through. But the trail that we'll be going on is not underwater, so it's high and dry. And so we'll be taking a loop, and we'll be looking at, of course, our grasses, our sedges, and we have some nice fall wildflowers already coming up. We might even have a little bit of fruit left on our sabletonias, which will be fun to see if you haven't seen those before. So yeah, it will be a couple hours, and if anybody wants to stay longer, there's a nice trail system. You can wander at your leisure out there as well. It is hot. It is open. So you would have to be prepared for some sun and heat. And if we're all like done, you can be done. So we won't be far from the parking lot. So when you come in, we'll just try to. The parking lot is not big, so we just, depending on how many cars there are, we want to try to park as organized as we can. And if we need to park out on the road, I can help to try to direct people that are off the road. That way, people that live at the inn can still come back and forth. So does that help? Okay. But yeah, if you Google the directions to Old Myakka Preserve, it takes you. I think it now takes you to the corner there of Fruitville and Vernon Myakka. But you just there's a brown sign that says Old Myakka. You just keep going and get to it. So yeah, we should have some grasses. October is probably a little bit better month to go, but we'll have some good stuff to look at. So okay. Question was difference between a rame and a raceme. The terms get used interchangeably. And I don't actually know the full reason why anthropogons use rame, but they do. But it's really technically, I think, botanically the same thing. So if you want to say raceme, I would go with that. I wouldn't correct you. I might. Yeah, but for that group, it's just like for Gesneriads, you might have terminology that you might apply to the family. I think it seems it's the same thing with these genera. Yes. Oh, okay, cool. You had your hand up. Sorry. Yes. I've never seen it in its native state. From the sort of collection and literature standpoint, it's supposed to be native to maybe like maybe just up a little bit, like from a creek edge or a river edge. So someplace moist, shady-ish, is where you would find it in its natural habitat. I have never seen it where I could say, yes, this is St. Augustine here is naturally occurring, because it is planted so prolifically. You can't. I've never seen a case where I could say that. But yeah, it's usually like a moist, just a little bit up from that creek or river habitat. Oh yeah, Tom could certainly answer that better. But yeah, there are a lot of plants that you can plant. Like I have a St. Augustine lawn in my front yard that I moved into, and I just plugged in sunshine mimosa, and they live happily together. I didn't kill the grass, I didn't anything, but the mimosa goes somewhat dormant, in the winter, right? It goes dormant. So having that St. Augustine there, at least it's not like bare dirt. But like in my backyard, I have things like sunshine mimosa and perennial peanut and river sage, salvia micella. I have kind of uh um uh, why is my brain going? My brain is going. Help me out here. Frog fruit, thank you. Frog fruit is another excellent one. You can also get like some of the creeping lithrums. I mean, there are a lot of species that you can sort of plug in. They might not take most of my backyard is sunshine mimosa, but I have this like this little like. So yeah, I mean, if you wanted to, you could always maybe remove a small section of grass and start plugging in, those mixes and see how you or that's native. Yeah, you know what I mean. So you're kind of so
Thank you, Liz. I didn't mention it earlier, but Liz is a land manager for Sarasota County now. And she's going to be taking us to Old Myakka Preserve, one of the Sarasota preserves here. So it'll be really fun to experience that with her and see some of these grass close in person. I think it's going to make a lot more sense. And I will say, I probably learned more about grasses in the last hour than I probably ever thought I would learn in my whole life. So it's really special to have Liz present for us. Just a couple quick upcoming events I want to let you guys know about, and then I'll let you guys go. But as we mentioned, this Saturday we have a field trip at Old Myakka Preserve. It's almost full. There's a few more spots left for it. So if you want to attend, if you could register on Meetup, that'd be great. If you don't have Meetup, you can get it, or you can just let me know if you want to attend, and I can put you on the roster too. There's a plant rescue opportunity. 24th. That's a Tuesday at 8 a.m. at the Pinelands Reserve in Venice. It's close to Oscar Shear Park. Apparently they're making a fire station or something there, and it's a pine flatwoods type area. So a lot of the plants you can dig up, you can take them home, or you can donate them to Sarasota County that they can use in restoration efforts. So I'll be sending out an email to everybody about that if you want to get your hands dirty. And then along those same lines, we also are partnering with the Conservation Foundation of the Gulf Coast to do a restoration of a pop ash swamp at their Myakka Headwaters Preserve. And that's going to be in October 26th. It's a Saturday. And the Serenoa chapter actually donated 1,000 pop ash trees as part of that restoration that they're doing that day. Overall, during that day, they're going to aim to plant 10,000 trees. So it's a really big effort with a lot of different organizations. So that'll be a fun volunteer opportunity too. And lastly, next meeting is going to be on October 21st. Again, right here at Selby Gardens. We're going to have Damon Moore speaking, who is a restoration specialist, has his own nonprofit called Oyster River Ecology. And he's going to be talking about how he transformed a turf grass area into incorporated that as part of a natural preserve. So some really cool things coming up. They'll all be on our meetup page. Anything else? Yep, Kathy. Yeah, I didn't talk about the field trip. Yeah, Damon will be doing a field trip too. So he'll be speaking on the 21st, and then the Sunday following the meeting, he'll be actually doing a field trip at Perico Preserve. Okay, so we have 5 minutes left. I'm putting a 5-minute timer on the auction. I do want to mention too, because it obviously the meeting didn't go super smooth. I forgot to say that we have another opening, which is a Zoom coordinator. So if anybody's sitting in the audience and sick of these technical difficulties, feel free to volunteer. But anyways, great meeting you guys, and I'll see you at the next meeting.